JPMorgan's CEO, Jamie Dimon, releasing his annual letter to shareholders. It is always an interesting read. It's always a long read. Michael Moore, Bloomberg finance editor, I'm sure has read it all. Good morning. Let's talk a little bit about what's in it. What are the key headlines that we should be taking away from Jamie Dimon this year?
Yeah, what we often see from Jamie is as much about public policy as about his bank itself. Sometimes that's been criticized in the past. Sometimes it's seen as, JPMorgan is so tied to the U.S. economy because it's so giant that perhaps public policy is where he should be, weighing in. So here we're seeing him call for further sanctions on Russia. That's notable because JPMorgan did have a decent business in Russia, underwrote a lot of debt there, but they have pulled back, as have others. So you see, Jamie even taking a harder line there and saying that over time it could cost them $1 billion from their exposures to Russia, but they don't see that as particularly meaningful in the grand scheme of things. Also, a lot of commentary on the Fed. A year ago, Jamie's letter was quite upbeat, talking about an economic boom coming out of the pandemic. This year, with the inflation fears, with the war going on, a much more subdued tone, talking about the Fed needs to, really thread a needle here to control inflation and keep growth going.
Would he, he always touches on global issues, geopolitical issues, although obviously in his role as CEO, he needs to look after the bank's interests. If he thought, sanctioning Russia, harder sanctions on Russia would cripple JPMorgan, but it was the right thing to do, would he still call for it?
Well, I'm not in his head, so hard to say there. But I think, because it was not that meaningful of exposure, because they've already started the pullback, I do think he, has less of that conflict going on. You've already seen them, they had the Sberbank CEO on their International Advisory Council. He's now been removed. JPMorgan, pulling a lot of business from Russia. So his words are consistent with the bank's actions so far. And you said, as you said, having to weigh in on the business as well. I think the biggest thing from JPMorgan's perspective that's in the letter is more defense of their acquisitions and their investments. There's been, some investor concern about the rate at which they're spending right now and whether those investments are going to pay off. And you saw Jamie Dimon really take on those criticisms and say we expect many of these to pay off within a few years.